Merryweather Security Consulting. If we were to put this organization simply, it is the private army of billionaire Devin Weston. One he uses as his own personal security, and when he's upset, he uses it against the three main protagonists within Grand Theft Auto 5. While that is the simplest, shortest way to describe it, the company has a much darker global presence and is also one that, let's say, is far from obeying a single person. We know following the death of Devin, Donald Percival, the founder of Merryweather, privately thanks the protagonist via an email for removing Devin and helping him buy up the 11% of Devin's share within Merryweather at a hugely reduced cost. Sharing such a move will in the long run, despite the massive amount of problems they have already caused Percival and Merryweather, still will end up generating him a massive amount of money. He also thanks them for not having to deal with Devin anymore, shedding light on the fact that Devin may well have been thought of as insufferable personally, or was just someone who was never told no due to his overall status and wealth, and thus did whatever he so pleased, at times coming to the detriment of Merryweather's overall perception and even its stocks. But perhaps we're getting a little bit ahead of ourselves. To really understand this massive beast that is Merryweather, we have to begin at the origins of this private military and cover the background of Donald Percival, its founder and main figurehead.
Well, there's been all these Merryweather folks hanging around.
Merryweather Security Consulting. Private army to the New World Order. Folks waging outsourced shadow wars in 20 countries around the globe and recently cleared to operate on U.S. soil.
As with some of the major characters within the series, we don't know every single detail of Donald Percival's early life, but for this particular case, perhaps that just does not matter. All we need to know is the foundation that led to the creation of Merryweather, which traces all the way back to a military coup in West Africa. From what it sounds like, this coup could have been based off of any of the real-world events taking place during the 2000s. Coups were quite rampant in the region during that time period, and without any specific coup or events being identified by Rockstar, it's just them showing off their signature moves of tying just enough real-world logic behind something to make it genuinely believable while keeping it generally vague, to either avoid needless backlash or definitively ground real-world events to fictional organizations. At least that's my guess, which I think could be as good as any. So I don't want to overreach here and say this is the events he particularly served in. Instead, it makes more sense to meet Rockstar halfway with its vagueness and just outline what such a military coup would have targeted, set out to achieve, Percival's possible role within it, and perhaps most important of all, how Merryweather would end up attracting certain investors like Devin Weston out of the origins of this military coup. Speaking of Devin, if we tie this to the very interesting Devin Weston video I released not that long ago, and recall the Alpha Fund that Devin created, which, in short, through that hedge fund, Devin was basically banking off of things that would not help humanity in any meaningful way, but instead positioned himself to, in fact, profit when catastrophes happened or things just generally went wrong. Within his Alpha hedge fund, the dedication to the Republic of Congo currency contracts and healthcare default swabs I think would best serve the purposes of this specific video as being two key things worth highlighting. Just so we are clear though, as of right now we can't tell if those are two things that are in fact directly related or not. Even if they weren't within the early stages, it does at least highlight that both Percival and Devin had an eye on making ends meet off unfortunate circumstances that impacted entire nations. Because for Devin, his Alpha Fund was betting off of the instability and reliability of Congo currency. If it fell through and the entire system failed, then Devin profited. Percival's military coup, on the other hand, would have realistically focused on a nation that was unstable, economically weak, didn't have a central government that was capable of dealing with people within its territory appropriately, and most likely was a nation that was possibly resource rich. Otherwise, what would be the point apart from potential alliances or more cooperative allies within the region? Whatever the specific details behind Percival's involvement in this so-called military coup, the main key here is that Percival as a Navy SEAL was introduced to profiting in war and potentially resource-rich conflict zones, telling us that he was far from a good guy. From here, that money that he received from the unnamed military coup, he would then go on to leave the military and officially establish Merryweather Security Consulting in 2003. Over the next 7 years, from 2003 to 2010, he kept it under tight control, only introducing it to the global stock exchange known as BOSAC in 2010. At least that's what we know of it. The wording is again quite vague, but what I personally find most compelling is Merryweather went from a true genuine private security firm to then in 2010 becoming a public traded asset, essentially marking a dynamic shift from private investors helping secure contracts, train and arm the men within Merryweather, to now seeing an influx of public investors whose primary aim is just to maximize profit. That is the bottom line, the main thing that they are concerned of. This becomes more of a business breakdown on how this economics within war works, but it explains much of what ends up going on with Merryweather later. Because stockholders, just like with any other company, would apply more pressure on share prices, disclosure expectations. If goals were hit or missed and by how much, shareholders would then continue to demand overall growth and profitable returns within their initial investments. It's hard to say how small Merryweather was in the years it was private, or if Devon was part of the initial round of private investors, or if he got in when it began to be traded publicly. When and how he ended up obtaining 11% of Merryweather is never actually disclosed to us. And that's important to bring up because it brings into question the overall size of Merryweather during that period of it being private, and the nature of its contracts during that period as well. And becoming public would only serve as a catalyst of sorts to have it explode in funding and overall demand to essentially have a presence on seemingly every single continent around the entire globe, with an explanation behind their work conducted there, or at least the mentality behind their operations within that specific region. In Central and South America, their website claims is where Merryweather first began, working as mercenaries for hire, and doing so while governments trafficked in drugs and money. As an added incentive for those looking into a career at Merryweather, they're sure to add it's close enough to home so you can fly back to the United States on the weekend to see your kids that you lost in a divorce for being a violent drunk. For North America, it questions how can so many people claim to have a private army, revealing that more people than you actually think are able to. Apparently, according to them, rich people are terrified, so they'd rather have a private military to guard them when they venture outside. Here they're open about recently securing a number of high-profile government contracts and supplying private security for anybody looking into it. Western Europe is where they claim America's lackeys, who prefer to be referred to as allies, reside. There's potential for future expansion, but the main hope is some kind of war breaks out to help, what I take as giving Merryweather a chance to grow substantially in that specific region. Eastern Europe, funny enough, is too quiet for Merryweather's liking. Almost a bit dismissive in its tone, calling it a shadow of its former self, where the people drink themselves to death while the leaders steal everything and give it to their friends. Africa, Middle East, and Asia, on the other hand, is where Merryweather appears to be really thriving the most. For the Middle East, it's pretty straightforward. Described as the gravy train, the money, where it all happens. A place they say is batshit crazy for the last 400,000 years, or maybe even longer. But that doesn't matter, because that means Merryweather will be laughing all the way to the patriotic offshore bank thanks to the Middle East specifically. Africa is presented in an equally unflattering light. It's seen as a theme park of sorts. You can find lions, elephants, and pirates. The region is filled with people still in power that are nothing more than, as they say, despotic Fruit Loops, which means Merryweather can expect a steady supply of conflicts and contracts to be secured within that entire region. Not to mention the private work, as they know celebrities love to take trips to Africa to boost their public image by doing charitable work there, or by, as they say, buying babies in bulk like in the old days. And in either scenario, they pay crazy money for security, and that means Merryweather. Finally, Asia is a source of cheap labor. They outsource here by hiring Asian soldiers and killers, but only paying them pennies a day. So while the heads of Merryweather secure multi-million-dollar contracts, the Asian soldiers help Merryweather grow in the region while getting paid less than any other soldier within the organization will receive. They acknowledge this by saying American employees will of course be out of luck, but that's the way things go. It's a race to the bottom. And what will these Asian soldiers be doing here at Merryweather exactly? Well, the range of work goes from helping GIs with their dirty laundry. That's kind of ironic that that's the first line I decided to read. Then there's high-value courier service, training third world yokels how to fight like first world yokels, cafeteria services, guarding Playboy diplomats, finding weapons of mass destruction, differentiating insurgents from civilians, hilarious since Merryweather actually treats them all the same, creative interrogation tactics. I wonder if Devon's fun with Mr. K was inspired by Merryweather in any way, and then finally accidentally violating sacred religious cultures and then shooting people when they get upset for it. It's while reading all of this that I think it's the best time to do this proper transition. Some found it disappointing I didn't at the very least mention the real-life influences of certain things within Grand Theft Auto, so I wanted to correct that to a degree here by saying Merryweather's own creation and implementation into Grand Theft Auto's universe still does appear to be a parody of real-life companies. In Merryweather's case specifically, it's influenced by the real-world private military contractor known as Blackwater. Blackwater itself can become its own rabbit hole, so without getting too deep into it, the shorthand side of it I think is at least worth explaining, as both founders of Blackwater were former Navy SEALs, originally created in 1996 versus Merryweather's 2003. In its early days, Blackwater was presented as a massive 7,000-acre training facility out in the dismal swamp region of North Carolina, Virginia state borders, and within this facility, known as Blackwater Lodge, roughly $6.5 million was invested to build several indoor and outdoor shooting ranges, urban reproductions, an artificial lake, and a full-size driving track. It was considered, and I believe to be still thought of, as the largest training facility in the whole world. Eric Prince at the time, the founder of Blackwater, would go on to explain the reason for this facility being so massive was he wanted to do for the national security apparatus what FedEx did for this postal service. From here, Blackwater would grow to develop its security company in 2002. Expanding from just training law enforcement and future military personnel to now accepting open contracts, which exploded post 9/11. Historically, we can even see these contracts escalate. Its earliest known contract was centered around training local law enforcement and military personnel, training them with small-scale firearms and tactical knowledge. Later, the first major U.S. federal government contract came in 2000, valued at over $35 million. It was to train U.S. Navy sailors in counterterrorism following the USS Cole bombing. Over the years of 2002 to 2003, it would win extensive military and intelligence support deals, leading to high-profile protective details in Afghanistan, particularly a $5.4 million contract between Blackwater and the Central Intelligence Agency. The main premise of this deal was Blackwater was hired to provide security for CIA operatives and the agency's station located in Afghanistan. Later on, it would secure a lucrative $25 million State Department contract within Iraq. Over the next several years, Blackwater expanded its operations to include logistics, aviation, airlift support, and specialized security for U.S. government personnel. Again, I can't stress enough that I'm basically giving you all a crash course on the understanding of Blackwater and everything it did. There's a lot more nuance and specifics to everything, so excuse me for those that are a little bit more knowledgeable on this and want the full picture of everything. Maybe I'll dive a little more into that on the second channel, which, if you're interested, recently launched a history channel linked down below. But tying this all back to Grand Theft Auto, unlike Merryweather, Blackwater remained a private security firm and doesn't appear to have been placed on the open market to accept all investors. But it did receive a change in its name following public backlash related to a fall from grace of sorts. In February of 2009, Blackwater was renamed to XE Services, and then in 2011 changed its name again to Academy. The purpose was to distance itself from intense public backlash, legal scandals, and loss of government contracts after it was revealed in 2007 its guards were involved in the infamous Nusur massacre. On September 16, 2007, Blackwater security employees escorting a U.S. Embassy convoy opened fire and killed 17 Iraqi civilians and wounded 20 others. This event, going down as the aforementioned Nusur massacre, would then cause the name Blackwater to circulate worldwide and become a symbol of controversial private military contractors focusing on profits and the bottom line than the well-being of people. I share all of that on Blackwater because Merryweather apparently did have a name change intending to distance itself from previous controversies, but again, Rockstar's vagueness leaves more to be desired on even what that former name of Merryweather could have been. It also highlights the escalation of Blackwater that could have very well taken place within Merryweather. It could have established its own training facility focused on tactical training that was a center focus of military and law enforcement agencies going forward, and then expanded into actually accepting open contracts, bringing them to an international scale, which by 2013 we see them having bases in Asia, Africa, Europe, America, South America, and the Middle East. Needless to say, going public did well in exploding Merryweather's growth and overall power. The US's situation is very unique though. It's mentioned as Merryweather is cleared to finally operate on US soil, and in doing so, we do know that it secures a very lucrative contract with the government of the United States, which is around the same time that Percival's heard trying his hardest to lobby the president to engage in a war with France, the Middle East, or Asia, claiming it'll boost the economy, which is not true. It'll do nothing but really increase the national defense budget to further financially back companies like Merryweather, giving it a massive boom, while the rest of the economy is put in a fragile state to deal with the negative effects of warfare. Playing a little bit of devil's advocate here, there is a small case to be made in at least helping increase jobs or even claiming to aid former veterans as Merryweather does aggressively market towards ex-law enforcement and former military personnel. But even then, it's all more directed at just letting the people who have already been trained, who have little to no remaining moral compass, if any at all, rearm and just get back to killing and doing whatever they want without any solid repercussions.
Put the gun down, gentlemen.
Who the fuck are they?
Fucking Merryweather. What are they doing here?
Merryweather, at war in the USA.
In 2013, during the events of Grand Theft Auto V's main story, Merryweather is recently cleared to operate on US soil. During this exact same time, it's revealed through news reports right after Trevor's Merryweather heist in the port of Los Santos that Merryweather was just approved by Congress to have a domestic pass. With this pass, it immediately launched a high-value courier service, which we actually see in the game a few times, and a special security detail in the port of Los Santos specifically. The contract to serve as security within the port of Los Santos is particularly important because on the smaller, easier for the public to see side of things, Merryweather's working out of a high-traffic international port as security, and what would be a major metropolitan area, and if we were to go based off the real-world counterpart of the Port of Los Santos, which of course is the Port of Los Angeles, Merryweather being approved to operate and work as security here would essentially mean it would be the major protector and operator of the largest port in the Western Hemisphere. If Trevor's correct, claiming around $36 billion of cargoes brought into the city through these ports, which adjusted for inflation of today, that number would equate to $51.6 billion, and you understand the background of Merryweather, which is a private military that profits off anyone and everyone while fighting shadow wars. So you can see just why Trevor's ears immediately perk up with Merryweather's involvement at the port. Apart from security, which Merryweather appears to conduct quite aggressively by beating the hell out of Floyd, Merryweather's privately running its courier service here within the port as well. And its first client is for the United States government. You see, that super weapon Trevor steals from the wreckage of the SS Bulker, well, that's property of the United States government. It's never said what exactly it is. I've seen claims of it being a nuke, ICBM, warhead, an EMP, or even a seismic weapon. Seismic weapons are, to our public knowledge anyways, non-existent. But what a seismic weapon theoretically can do is trigger intentional natural disasters, such as earthquakes and volcanic eruptions, utilizing those to wipe out people and territories, but claiming it was just an act by Mother Nature. Who really knows? Lester does claim it's experimental, and Trevor allegedly was aiming to sell it off to the Chinese or the highest bidder on the black market. So there is room for theories and possible explanations on what it is. But what interests me a little more is, while I did just say it belonged to the United States government, I wonder if it really was theirs or if it was Merryweather's. And while publicly Merryweather was just cleared to operate domestically, we have to keep in mind this is not the first time Merryweather has worked on US soil. I don't mean to continuously do callbacks to other videos, but I think they're all important because they all do overlap. The Steve Haynes, Devin Weston, and Agent ULP videos all overlap one primary research facility, and that's the Humane Research Labs and the work that's properly being conducted there. In those videos, we basically outline how Steve Haynes is nothing more than a giant liar regarding the research, who's behind it, and why he wants to hid it in an effort to stop terrorism and help the FIB gain its own funding. Now, ignoring everything else, for Merryweather, it's interesting because while their involvement at the port is what garners public attention, they've been operating for some years prior to 2013 at the Humane Research Labs. Originally owned by a pharmaceutical company under the ownership of Maxim Rashkovsky and Dima Popov, the facility was then leased to Don Percival and Merryweather. Now keep in mind, just because it was leased to Merryweather doesn't mean the entire building was under Merryweather control. Realistically speaking, it's quite possible that they could have leased a certain department within the building while the rest of the building is locked down and guarded by the United States military as a government asset. And the reason I say that is because it would then explain why during the mission Monkey Business, when it's hit, we see military personnel alongside the IAA respond to Steve Haynes. As a governmental asset, the attack will then be treated as a breach of national security. Subtly, I do want to say it may be possible this whole thing serves as Rockstar's nod of Blackwater working with the CIA in real life, as with the IAA maybe working with Merryweather to some degree in regards to some things, but then they may be sprinkling in some usual corruption tied to the inherent nature of being a company meant all about profiting off of war. Regardless, at Humane Research Labs, Merryweather was involved in developing a biological nerve toxin that was most likely tested on monkeys kept within locked cages seen during the raid by Michael, Steve, and Dave. Later, when Agent 14 from the IAA discusses Steve Haynes' claims of Merryweather being contracted by the IAA, he claims it was all lies, and does use the players in GTA Online to later raid the facility to acquire experimental railguns by Merryweather. Truthfully, the more you look into it, it's again intentionally vague, but if I was to come out with one concrete answer on everything, it would be that I do believe Merryweather and Percival was working with the United States government and what may have been a mutually beneficial contract, or contracts, lucrative ones for Merryweather at that. They most likely gained the trust of the IAA. Both agencies have men here at Humane Labs Research, and we know that because Michael kills both Merryweather guards and military personnel while carrying out the nerve toxin. But Merryweather is also corrupt and self-serving. Apart from reports within the game's universe of Merryweather guards having moments like getting drunk and opening fire at nearby ships, later claiming insurgents opened fire on them, there were people like Devin Weston who do control Merryweather and can use them to their own personal interests. Devin in-game has also already made it clear he's far from holding any reservations on selling things off to the communistic Chinese, as long as he can make a profit. Who's to say there aren't other people like Devin who can and will abuse their control over a private military? And remember, Merryweather's influence is massive. Apart from the Port of Los Santos and guarding the experimental weapon, Merryweather also has some kind of contract with the United States military. In the mission Minor Turbulence, Trevor crash lands his plane into the cargo bay of a massive plane carrying a huge weapons cache. After dodging rockets fired on US soil, killing everyone aboard, and taking control of the plane, he's contacted by 2 fighter pilots to bring those weapons back to Fort Zancudo. After he refuses to listen, they choose to down the plane, sacrificing all the Merryweather branded trucks and weapons with it. In Derailed, Merryweather's courier service is responsible for transporting priceless artifacts. So when Trevor crashes the train, it triggers a heavy Merryweather response involving extensively armed inflatable boats, buzzard attack helicopters, and off-road vehicles to continue their pursuit. This mission specifically, I think, is meant to show more of Merryweather's private contracts, as it does accept those and work on them within US territory, but taking those all into account along with the raid on Michael's house at the direction of Devin and the arrival of Merryweather at the court center does complicate the picture a little bit more. If going off of what Dave said about their arrival being true, it just boils down to Trevor consistently hitting them so hard they have no choice but to begin to focus all their efforts on the people that aren't just costing them all this valuable contracts, but doing major damage to its public image. Speaking of its public image, where does everything leave it? Moving over into Grand Theft Auto 6.
Merryweather, for all your private security needs. How can I help? The team will require a target. Target confirmed. Merryweather regret to inform you that the mission was unsuccessful. A refund has been deposited in your account.
According to the end of Grand Theft Auto 5's main story, Merryweather's reputation is in ruins, and all of its profitable contracts, biggest of which were those signed with the United States government, are terminated. Technically, this would then revoke its right to officially operate on US soil, although most likely thanks to Merryweather's prominent role in certain services that allows Rockstar to do certain things and explain weapons and vehicles as Merryweather funding and Merryweather basically serving as a plot device, along with the genuine potential GTA 5's main story left on the table to further explore Merryweather and all of its contracts, as well as just Merryweather possibly being, as I said, an easy excuse to get away with quite a number of things. It continues to operate across the entire state of San Andreas post-2013. Its influence is felt everywhere. In later updates, GTA Online does make note Merryweather's stocks continue to plummet alongside its reputation, but through a mix of corruption and bribes taken by agencies or even government officials, it does continue to get away with seemingly doing whatever it wants. I'm of course glancing over quite a bit because Grand Theft Auto Online's story behind it is quite extensive and a little confusing, so I am going to tackle GTA Online with everything it does in another video. But for this Merryweather topic, going from what we see at the end of Grand Theft Auto 5 and just understanding that Merryweather is still operating in general on US soil, I think having it return in the next game or even establish a spiritual successor of sorts, like the company being the exact same, but just having a name change to distance itself from whatever took place in Los Santos in 2013, and maybe even go through a corporate restructure of sorts following the death of Devin, perhaps even seeing Don Percival after all the backlash he and his company received, watching him step down or hand over the position of CEO to someone else that he trusted deeply and he instead becomes head of board of directors or something similar, I think would be a great way to continue forward. Personally, I think Merryweather, its goals, armaments, and overall drive for profit in combination with how it does or even doesn't work with the established government agencies is an interesting premise that shouldn't end in this Grand Theft Auto game. I mean, look at Noose and the Jingoism Act. It continued from Grand Theft Auto 4 to Grand Theft Auto 5, and maybe will continue into GTA 6 depending on literally the in-game's president and how the elections within that story goes. Because if you didn't know, Grand Theft Auto does actually share its president. I want to take this time to thank all of my Patreon supporters. If you want to see this type of content directly, or I should say supported directly without any type of ads, consider checking out the Patreon link down below. I also mentioned earlier in the video that I have recently launched a history channel, so if that piques your interest at all, consider checking that out as well. Either case, seriously, thank you for watching all the way to the end. And feel free to share what you want to see covered in the next video, whether that be a specific character or organization in or outside of Grand Theft Auto.